Hello people, welcome to the People Building video podcast. So we're going to talk about chunking today, which is something that I've spoken about before on the regular audio podcast. But I want to talk to you about it today because actually it's highlighted an issue that someone I was working with had, which was all related to the way that they were chunking information. Now let me just explain a little bit about what chunking actually is. So if we take fruit as an example, here we have some fruit. There it is, bananas and pears and grapes and what are they, blackcurrants. So if we take this pear, for example, there are different ways that we can chunk information about this pear. First of all, we can chunk up, and that gives us a much broader overall idea about this piece of fruit. When we chunk up, a key question is for what purpose? So, for example, fruit could be because of food, it could be for energy. So you get the idea, it gets much more abstract and much more overall when we're chunking up. When we chunk down, it's quite the opposite. It goes into much more detail. So if we looked at this pear again, we could say, well, what specifically about this piece of fruit? We could see the core there perhaps, or the skin, or perhaps we would be thinking about the pips that are inside. So that's your differences when we're thinking about chunking. When you're chunking up, the information gets more abstract and broad and overall, and when we're chunking down, the information gets more specific. In fact, just to make sure you've really got it, let me give you another example, because in fact I'm resting the camera on a book, and the book has a picture of a car on it. So if we were to take cars, for example, and chunk up, and we would say, well, for what purpose cars, then the overall more abstract, bigger picture on cars could be, for example, transport. It could be to do with travel or energy. Whereas if we get more specific on cars, we could look at the finer details such as the lights, or the wheels, or the wing mirrors there, or the windscreen wipers, there we go. So that's the difference between chunking up and down. Now, the person that I was working with a couple of weeks ago had an issue with chunking, which I didn't identify at that moment in time, but recognised a bit later on when I was speaking to their parent about it. Because this is a younger client, and it's a client who will very soon be doing some exams. It's exam time at school at the moment, so we were looking into different ways to help this person with memory skills and a few other different bits and pieces, because the main challenge that they seemed to have was to do with their revision and the motivation to do that revision. There was a lot of I can't do it and I don't know the answer type stuff going on. So what happened was I did the memory skills technique, which I did with you in the last video podcast. And as we were recalling all of our list of various different items, the client kept saying to me, I don't know what comes next, I can't remember, I don't know. And when I just got this client to look at the one thing that went before, the answer would come. When they looked at the whole list and everything that we'd written down already and all the other bits that were still to come, they were totally overwhelmed by it. And I thought, well, that's odd. Anyway, I got speaking to the parent at the end of the session, and the parent said that there is this exam to do, and there's this exam to do, and there's this test and that test, and she gave me the whole catalogue of different exams that were going to be coming up over the next few weeks. And she said every time I try to get him to do this revision and to sit down and to focus, it's almost like he becomes completely overwhelmed. He says, I can't do any of it, even though he knows exactly what it is that he needs to do and has got a very high IQ and is in fact very bright. And at that moment, bing, the light bulb came on, and I realised that there was a chunking issue. What was happening for this client is that there was too much information. It's like the bigger picture was too big and too broad for him to be able to take in all of the information that he needed. So when we were doing the memory skills, for example, instead of thinking what's the one thing that links this to this and the one thing that links this to this, instead of doing it one step at a time, his mind kept thinking very broad, and he was thinking, oh my gosh, I've got 50 things I need to remember, I can't do it. The same thing was happening when it came to study time, when it was time for him to revise for his exams, where his mum was saying to him, you've got this subject and this test and this exam coming up, it was just all too much. and it overwhelmed his mind to the point where he wouldn't do any. So what she's having to do instead now is actually not tell him about which exams are coming up when until just a few days before. And just a couple of days before, she's given him small chunks of information for him to revise so that the whole thing isn't there in his face, he's just doing it steps at a time. Now you may have heard the saying, don't try to eat an elephant all in one go, and this is precisely what that saying means. Don't try to do all of it all at the same time. When you break it down into smaller chunks and look more at the specific tasks that there are to do instead of the overall bigger picture, it suddenly seems much more achievable. So that's my tip to you today. Click on the link below, see what your free gift is, and I'll speak to you in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much. Bye.